That's where it all started. In 2010, 5 paintings were stolen from the Museum of Modern Art in Paris. Someone entered the building in the middle of the night, removed works by Modigliani, Picasso, and several other greats from the wall and then disappeared. The news hit all the world's media, which is not surprising because the damaged museum is not just in the center of Paris, it is practically opposite the Eiffel Tower. Here is a huge museum, turn your head around the tower. This means that the building not only has an impressive collection of world art, but also serious security measures. How the thief managed to sneak into the building unnoticed, spend enough time there to twist the impressive frames from all the paintings, and then take the masterpieces and disappear. This story is not only about a high-profile robbery. This story is about who, and most importantly why, steals masterpieces of world art and where they disappear after. Okay, let's go back 13 years now. May 20, 2010. That morning, the director of the Paris Museum of Modern Art was riding his bicycle to work. Glancing at his phone, he noticed several had been missed. All of them were from the head of the museum's security service. After contacting him, the director learned that 5 paintings had been stolen from the museum at night. The news was shocking, but the true scale of the incident became clear only upon arrival at the scene. The 5 stolen paintings were not just minor works lying in the museum's storerooms. These were one of the main masterpieces of the collection. Picasso, Modigliani, Matisse, Braque, and Leger. If you are far from art, then some of the names of the work may not be familiar to you, but that's okay. After all, there are categories that everyone understands: money and media. The total cost of the stolen goods was first estimated at $500 million, then reduced to $100 million, which is still quite impressive. The media immediately called the incident one of the largest thefts in the world history of art. And this was not an exaggeration. Especially for France, where before, of course, paintings were stolen from museums, but this was the first time to do so on such a large scale and in such a large quantity. On the first day after the theft, the overall picture of what happened was clear. Thanks to the CCTV cameras. Late the night before, a man in dark clothes and a mask on his head broke open a large window on the first floor, removed several paintings, took them out of their frames and took them away. Agree, it looks too simple for a large famous museum, and therefore several questions arise at once. Where was the security? Did the alarm go off? And if not, why not? And if so, then we return to the first question: where was the security? And how could one person carry out the entire operation? After all, there is no one on the CCTV footage except the only robber. Strangely enough, even these questions were answered on the same day. The guards noticed the missing paintings only in the morning. A few hours after everything happened. The alarm did not go off at the moment when the thief broke into the window. He never removed the painting from the walls. And apparently, the robber acted alone. Neither the cameras inside nor the cameras outside showed anyone else involved in the incident. The story already looked exciting. A lone thief, under the cover of darkness, broke into the building of a huge famous museum, stole 5 masterpieces of painting and disappeared. And the following fact looked especially interesting. These were not just the first paintings that came across, hanging on the walls. These are some of the most valuable works in the museum's collection. That is, either the thief knew exactly why he was going, or he is a robber with ideal aesthetic taste. What turned out to be true? And only part of the truth, because the figure of the robber is one of the most interesting aspects in this story. Let's expose the great artists a little. As if the combination of a masterpiece of painting sounds sublime and elitist, but when these paintings were first created, the situation often looked completely different. Not so pretentious. For example, people with money simply came to Rembrandt and ordered a portrait. In particularly fruitful years, he wrote by the dozens. That is, speaking in modern language, a man from Amsterdam in the 17th century needed a high-quality service, in this case a portrait. And he turned to a professional for this. In this case, to Rembrandt. The artist Renoir looked at the world from some kind of fairy tale kingdom, as if he himself was from there. With his brush he created a parallel reality. If you think I'm quoting an abstruse art critic, then no. The glory belongs to this man. The middle-aged man, who looks much more like a Gonic, did not live as an art connoisseur. His name is Vigéran Tomic and he is a thief. And as you understand, what he was doing was far from shooting phones in the alley. Everything was much more sophisticated. Later, due to Tomic's working methods, journalists will call him Spider-Man, but that will happen later. First there was a teenager from a poor Bosnian family who one day learned the power of art. This is the mid-80s. Tomic is 16 years old. He first visited the Orangerie Museum in Paris and saw paintings by Renoir there. The magical parallel reality in the paintings amazed Viren. He immediately told his parents that he was going to become an artist. To which his father replied that this was a hobby, not a job, and it would be better if Viren went to work in his garage. The teenager, of course, did not do this. True, he also did not start painting. Instead, Tomic spent all his time with friends at the abandoned Père Lachaise cemetery. Jumping between the tombstones of Proust, Chopin, and Wilde, he honed his parkour skills. A little later, friends began to use the skill to raid Parisians' apartments. Gradually, Vigéran Tomic began to work alone. In order to enter the apartments, he cracked locks, masterfully jumped on roofs and climbed steep walls. Now you understand how cinema actually differs from real life. In real life, Spider-Man doesn't save the world. In real life he is a burglar. Moreover, Tomic, let's say in his work, was distinguished by his slowness. He could enter the same apartment several times in order to carefully examine everything and ultimately take away the most valuable things. This type of work allowed the thief to lead a pleasant lifestyle. As a rule, he stole jewelry. Firstly, Paris is full of wealthy people, and secondly, jewelry is relatively easy to sell. It took the thief a couple of hours to raid the apartment, and the loot was enough to then relax for 6 months on the Côte d'Azur. In addition, Viren appreciated art, good wine, and cheeses. The only thing that stood out from the image of an aesthetic lover were his things. Tomic always wore beautiful sweatpants long before it became truly fashionable. But perhaps this is a cost of the profession. Jumping on rooftops in a tuxedo is inconvenient. During his raids on rich Parisian apartments, Tomic more than once came across objects of art, including expensive paintings by famous artists. Due to the fact that the paintings are difficult to sell, the thief at first preferred not to take them. But over time, something changed. Perhaps he was tired of stealing jewelry. Or perhaps the craving that brought the 16-year-old boy to the museum in the greenhouse took over. In the 2000s he began painting pictures. Works by Degas, Braque, Utrillo, and Tomic's favorite Renoir were stolen from several apartments. In order to steal the latter's painting, he used a bow and a rope and entered the apartment while the owners were sleeping there. They didn't notice anything, but the value of the stolen goods exceeded €1,000,000. In May 2010, Tomic walked along the Seine embankment past the Museum of Modern Art. In the window he saw a painting by one of the Cubists, but it was not this that attracted the attention of the experienced thief, but the huge window. There were no CCTV cameras on the roof at this location. And the locks on the window itself turned out to be very similar to those that Tomic had already broken. A plan immediately appeared in his head. Large museums look like a protected fortress. And I'm not talking about granny caretakers, I'm talking about security measures in famous galleries. There are metal detectors and security at the entrance, outside and inside the building, CCTV cameras, and also numerous motion sensors. In a large museum, even if you stand close enough to the painting, the alarm will immediately go off. It is impossible to even touch the canvas unnoticed, let alone remove it from the wall. Therefore, robbing a museum, especially one as large as the Paris Museum of Modern Art, is not an easy task. And yet, even the most secure and guarded buildings have weak points. It was them that Tomic first decided to find. On that day in May 2010, when he walked along the Seine embankment next to the creation of the museum, the study of the future crime scene began. And although Viren noticed that there was no CCTV camera above one of the windows on the ground floor, when he looked closely, he saw another one nearby. Luckily, the view for this camera was blocked by a roof parapet. While peeling off the paint, Tomic discovered that the bolts that secured the window were quite weak. He was surprised by such vulnerability, that is, opening a window and getting inside the museum was not such a difficult task. However, this is just the beginning. There are security and alarm systems inside the building, so to study these aspects the thief went to the museum as a visitor. Inside the gallery, Tomic felt a strong feeling. Firstly, he felt vibrations coming from some of the works. Viren admitted that he had never read a single book on art in his life, but despite this, he always felt strong emotions from the works of good artists. In addition, by that point in his career as a thief, Tomic perceived thefts as creativity, requiring the imagination of some kind of magic and, of course, attention to detail. It was the details he noted inside the building. The key was the motion sensors. Passing by them, the thief noticed an interesting feature. The light of the sensor bulb did not change when a person was nearby. Usually the light is green, but when the sensor detects movement, it switches to red. However, in some rooms of the museum, the sensors continued to light green, which means that some of them were not working. This detail became final in Tomic's decision to commit a robbery at the Paris Museum of Modern Art. A week before the theft, the thief came to the museum building early in the morning, before dawn. From the street, he watched what the guards were doing inside the museum at this time. It turned out that after a short walk through the empty halls they were leaving. Tomic then began working on removing the bolts that held the window in place. This painstaking work took a lot of time. Tomic returned for this for several more days to finish. He hid the place of the tightened bolts with putty of a matching color. Finally, on May 20th, a few hours before dawn, the final phase of the operation began. First, Viren carefully removed the window he had been working on for a week. Then he cut off the lock and climbed inside the museum. There he looked around, carefully avoiding some of the working motion sensors. Then the thief crawled back out and walked to the embankment. He waited 15 minutes to make sure the alarm didn't go off. And this did not happen. Then he went back inside, took those 5 paintings off the wall and freed them from their frames. And this, by the way, is not as fast as it might seem. But Tomic was in no hurry. He knew that the guards had already made their rounds and were unlikely to return to this room. Afterwards, the thief carefully carried the paintings through the window into a car parked nearby. He knew that under no circumstances should he remain at the crime scene for long. But one of the paintings haunted him. This is a woman with Modigliani blue eyes. While still inside, he wanted to remove it from the wall, but according to Tomic, at that moment a chilling fear alienated him. The painting seemed to tell him that he would never forgive himself if he took it away. Of course, this is only the story of the thief himself. We are unlikely to ever know what actually happened between him and the woman with blue eyes. But the fact is that this painting remained hanging on the wall in the Paris Museum of Modern Art. True, Tomic grabbed another work by Modigliani, A Woman with a Fan. Apparently, this lady turned out to be much less talkative. At dawn, Tomic left the crime scene. The streets of Paris were empty, and in the trunk of his Peugeot lay 5 masterpieces of world painting. The next stage after the theft of paintings is, of course, their sale. Tomic didn't love art enough to just put the paintings in his basement and look at them. This fact will probably surprise you, But stealing expensive paintings does not guarantee huge profits. Many of you have probably seen these shots. These are auctions. Events where you can buy masterpieces of world art for fabulous money. Millions of dollars, tens of millions, and sometimes hundreds. The only problem is that this is a white market. You can't just steal a famous painting from a museum or private collection, and then sell it at a public auction for a lot of money. And then the question arises why the theft of painting masterpieces is not such a rare occurrence. Just a couple of years ago, a Van Gogh work was stolen in Holland. In 2010, a Picasso painting disappeared in Brazil. In 2004, the famous Munch scream in Norway. And these are just a couple of cases offhand. Over the past 30 years, there have been several dozen high-profile thefts of famous masterpieces of world art. And only in an absolute minority of these cases were the stolen works eventually found. The record, of course, belongs to the case of 1990. Then almost a dozen super masterpieces were stolen from the Isabella Gardner Museum in Boston. Including the only Seascape by Rembrandt, one of the few works by Vermeer, as well as Degas, Manet, and others. The total cost of all paintings is still estimated at $500 million. Moreover, over the past 30 years, the museum's management has repeatedly increased the amount of remuneration. Today it is $10 million. Moreover, not for the paintings themselves, but only for the information that will lead to their finding. So, look carefully at this work by Rembrandt. Firstly, it's beautiful, and secondly, you never know. But even despite such a rich reward or the paintings themselves, no intelligible information has been found over the past few decades. Moreover, the crime itself has not yet been solved. It is completely unclear who the two people were who, on the night of 1990, dressed up in police uniforms, entered the museum building, tied up the guards and took away world masterpieces. Interestingly, it is possible to find the kidnappers themselves quite often. But not what they stole. The canvases literally disappear. However, thanks to the rich history of art heists over the past 100 years, some conclusions and assumptions can be made about the fate of the stolen objects. The first version as collateral on the black market. In some countries around the world there are separate police departments that investigate crimes only in the field of art. And their investigators know very well what use the stolen masterpiece has long been found by cartels, mafia structures, and other organized crime. This is an extremely interesting scheme. Some bandits want to buy something illegal from other bandits, weapons, a prohibited substance, and so on. But at the time of the transaction, the buyer may not have enough funds. Then they use the stolen masterpiece as collateral. It is logical because a famous painting has a fairly high cost, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. Then, having paid for the goods in full, the buyer receives his masterpiece back and can use it in new transactions. I am sure that Rembrandt in the 17th century did not even realize that his works could have such interesting applications. This theory could also explain why many stolen masterpieces literally disappear. Firstly, they are transferred from one bandit's hands to another. That is, they can remain in the shadows for decades. And secondly, gang members tend to die unexpectedly and quickly. Not the safest job. For example, in that Boston Museum robbery in 1990, the suspects included many members of the local Italian mafia. And the problem is that in the 10 years after the robbery, almost all of them were gradually killed in some kind of internecine wars. That is, that same Seascape by Rembrandt may lie today in some abandoned basement. And no one knows about it, because the last owner was shot during disassembly. Maybe 50 years later his grandchildren will open the basement of their grandfather and father Rembrandt. The second version of the disappearance of famous masterpieces is a plea bargain. Here's how this option works. An experienced criminal steals a famous painting. But not in order to sell it and not in order to buy a shipment of weapons with its help, but in order to bargain for freedom. An experienced criminal knows that sooner or later he will most likely be caught. And then he can use the stolen masterpiece for a plea bargain. For example, in the USA there were several cases when the FBI agreed to release or greatly reduce the sentence of a criminal if he gave out some very valuable masterpiece of art. And although there were relatively few such cases, rumors immediately spread in the mafia environment that the conventional Rembrandt under the mattress could one day buy you freedom. It is possible that some of the art robberies were committed for this reason. Version number 3, Extravagant Rich People. In 1962, the first episode of the James Bond film universe was released. In one of the scenes, the main character is visiting a wealthy villain. There he notices a painting by the famous artist Goya. This work was actually stolen from a London gallery a year before the film was released. Thus, the filmmakers played up a real-life event in the plot. But the interesting move turned into an unexpected result. The idea that stolen masterpieces could end up in the basements or secret galleries of the extravagant rich has become popular. And in general, this theory, although a stretch, has a right to exist. Famous paintings worth millions of dollars will not be worth as much on the black market as experts value them at. According to police officers who deal with such crimes, the price of a painting on the black market is significantly reduced. Approximately up to 10% of the original price. But given that the famous painting can easily cost $20 or $30 million, a thief could theoretically sell it for 2 to 3. That is, it is beneficial for both him and the buyer. True, there is one important point to consider here. Before making such a move, the thief must already have a buyer. Otherwise, a situation similar to the robbery of the Dutch Museum in 2012 will occur. Then several Romanians stole works by Gauguin, Matisse, and Monet. It was only after the theft that the criminals began looking for buyers. They knew that the total value of these paintings was tens of millions of dollars, which was true. At first they tried to sell it for 40 million. There were no buyers, then they reduced the price to 4 million. No luck again. Eventually they got so desperate that they tried to sell it to someone for $100,000. One of the potential buyers turned out to be a policeman. The robbers were detained. But what is really interesting is that the paintings have not yet been found. Now it remains to understand which version was followed by the thief who stole paintings from the Paris Museum of Modern Art. Where did the stolen masterpieces go? When on May 20, 2010, Varan Tomic was driving through Paris with 5 paintings in the trunk of his Peugeot, he already knew exactly what to do with them. Over many years in the profession, Tomic managed to develop some connections. He knew a 50-year-old French businessman named Carve. With his help, the thief sold many of the stolen jewelry. In addition, Carve was not far from art, he ran a small gallery. He also knew that in the apartments that Tomic was renting out there were also expensive paintings. Therefore, Carve gave the thief in advance a small list of artists who could potentially be of interest to his clients. One of the items on this list was the French painter Fernand Léger. His painting of a still life with candlesticks was discovered by Tomic during one of his explorations at the Museum of Modern Art. In order to steal this painting, Carve offered €40,000 after the sale. Tomic agreed. As a result, the thief did not limit himself to one job, but took as many as 5. And I was still thinking about the 6th one. Gallery owner Carve did not expect this at all. He agreed to take another painting by Modigliani. It was decided to leave all the rest for the time being in the Carve gallery. Adding to the nervousness was the fact that at that moment the robbery of the Museum of Modern Art was the main news in the country and thundered throughout the world. Tomic hid the money he earned at the home of a prostitute he knew. At that moment, he did not yet know that the police already had a verbal portrait of him. On one of Tomic's trips to the museum, a skateboarder was skating nearby. At first, he didn't pay attention to the strange man in dark clothes who was digging around next to the window. The skateboarder thought it was a worker. But on that day, when all the French media trumpeted about the robbery, everything fell into place. The skateboarder gave police a rough description of the suspect. However, this was not enough, because no serious evidence was found at the crime scene. 6 months later, Varan Tomic's name appeared in another investigation, and he became one of the suspects. The police started tapping his phone. Not only did Tomic mention the robbery of the Museum of Modern Art during the conversation, but there was also a message on his answering machine with the following content. If you want to purchase paintings, art, and jewelry, then do not hesitate to contact us. Considering that the photographs looked like Tomic looked like the man described by the skateboarder, the police began to closely monitor him. So they discovered that the thief began to have his eye on another big deal. One of the most famous museums in the world, the Pompidou Center in Paris. He studied emergency exits, bought gloves, and suction cups. About a year after the theft, Tomic was arrested while trying to burglarize another apartment. The same fate befell the gallery owner Carva and another accomplice who helped sell the paintings. During the search, none of them were found to have the visited paintings. Although Tomic admitted to what he had done, and even more stated that in fact the paintings belonged to him. Gallery owner Carver said police didn't notice the paintings when they searched his home, and when they left, he destroyed everything. Few people believed such a story, because no matter how strange it may sound, it was obvious that all participants in the criminal scheme loved art very much and were unlikely to be capable of destroying masterpieces of painting. However, the canvases have not been found to this day. The trial took place only 6 years later in 2017. Varan Tomic received 8 years in prison. There he finally began to engage in real creativity. Varan makes small sketches. But in an interview with a journalist, he honestly stated that he does not see himself as a great artist. And although the stories of such people are always interesting, in this case the fate of the paintings is no less interesting. After all, right now they are most likely hanging or lying somewhere, and will almost certainly outlive both their captors and you and me. Once upon a time the Mona Lisa was stolen from the Louvre. It was a long time ago and exciting. Then, at the beginning of the 20th century, the very fact of the theft of a painting from a large museum had the effect of a bomb exploding, and definitely influenced the future popularity of the masterpiece. Logically, one could assume that if at least one of the paintings stolen in 2010 is found, it should become as iconic as Mona Lisa. But art experts do not share this view. According to them, over the past centuries, theft of art objects has become so common that they can no longer greatly influence the popularity of the painting. But it is clear that only time will give the final answer. What makes some people buy painting masterpieces for tens of millions of dollars? Other people to steal these masterpieces. And still others come to the museum and look at them, despite the fact that today everyone has the internet and you can view the collection of the Louvre and other famous museums in excellent resolution online. Perhaps there is an answer to this question in the excellent novel The Goldfinch. I will now try to retell it in my own words. Look, you come to a museum and there hangs an original by Leonardo da Vinci, that is, a painting that this particular person painted 500 years ago. This picture contains some kind of plot, images, and thoughts of a person who lived 500 years ago. And the author of this work, of course, wanted to say something. That is, in fact, standing in front of this work in the museum, you are in direct dialogue with a person who lived 500 years ago. Mozart will not play you his symphony, Tolstoy will not read his novel. All this you will see or hear only in the interpretation of others. But the original painting is a completely different matter.